January 12, 1944. Near Naples, Italy, a bitter wind cut through the darkness as a line of Italian POWs was herded onto a creaking freight truck. The smell of damp wood mingled with smoke from distant chimneys, sharp in the cold night air. Snowflakes, light as ash, clung to tattered jackets and muddied boots. Luigi, 24, clutched a threadbare blanket, the edges fraying under his grip, the fabric infused with the faint scent of mothballs and his mother's care. His fingers traced the stitching, each pull of thread a fragile tether to a home that seemed impossibly far. Around him, men whispered names of wives and children, voices trembling under the weight of dread. One soldier, Pietro, 27, shivered violently, wrapping his arms around his knees, seeking comfort from the cold metal beneath him. The wooden floor was slick, coated in frost and the remnants of snow, each step a delicate negotiation against slipping. Franz, a young German guard with a stiff posture and cold eyes, leaned against the truck wall, observing silently. He carried no weapon openly, yet the palpable threat of violence hung in the air like a thick fog. Every cough, every scrape of boots on the wood, echoed with uncertainty. Luigi pressed the blanket closer, feeling the thin warmth against his chest. He noticed small details, the way the blanket's fibers clung to his coat, the faint rustle of shifting bodies, the hiss of wind sneaking through gaps in the truck's wooden siding. A man whispered, "Will we?" and then swallowed the question. Luigi's gaze settled on his blanket, the small fold of cloth offering a quiet promise. He carefully draped it over Pietro's shoulders, an unnoticed act of humanity. The gesture rippled subtly through the truck, brief nods and faint murmurs of acknowledgement passing from man to man. For the first time, a fragile trust began to take root. The truck jolted forward, scraping over frozen earth, and Luigi felt a shiver run through his body, not from cold alone, but from the enormity of dependence and survival in that dark, uncertain journey. It was a night that promised only hardship, yet through a simple, threadbare blanket, the first seeds of dignity and shared endurance were quietly sown. The truck rattled along narrow country roads for hours, wood groaning under weight, axles squealing as they twisted over frozen ruts. Inside, breaths puffed out in misty clouds, mingling with the damp scent of the truck and faint traces of mildew. Luigi's blanket, now shared among 3 men, was pressed to cheeks and shoulders, a fragile membrane of warmth against biting cold. Mario, 28, shifted repeatedly, adjusting the fold around his knees, muttering a soft thanks to Luigi. Hands met briefly across bodies, repositioning the cloth, layering protection in silence. Each movement small but heavy with purpose, a quiet pact between prisoners navigating fear together. Franz, the guard, remained at the back, his silhouette rigid yet silent. Then, almost imperceptibly, he stepped aside from the doorway, leaving the men undisturbed. No words were spoken, no rifles raised. The absence of immediate threat reshaped the interior atmosphere. Fear, once tight and relentless, loosened into a wary curiosity. Luigi noticed the subtle creak of the boards beneath shifting weight, the warmth clinging stubbornly to the frayed blanket, the rhythmic thrum of the engine vibrating through tired legs. Each sound, each texture became amplified, an anchor in uncertainty. One prisoner adjusted the blanket over a shivering comrade's shoulders, whispering a quiet encouragement. Luigi traced a finger along the edges, sensing how the fabric had absorbed their shared breaths, their anxious movements. In these small acts, the blanket evolved from a mere covering to a symbol of collective endurance. Hunger gnawed faintly, cold seeped deeper, yet the men felt a subtle shift. Humanity, though fragile, persisted. Hours passed, measured in creaks, sighs and shifting folds of cloth. Eyes met briefly across the confined space. Unspoken recognition of survival and trust. Mario murmured again. Grazie. Voice trembling, barely audible. Luigi's mind marked the moment, aware that this cautious calm was temporary, fragile, yet potent. Each second extended, yet compressed history, experience, and fear into a dense, almost tangible presence. But this was only the beginning, Luigi thought. The blanket, pressed, folded, shared, carried the weight of hope in ways that no words could. Every shift of fabric, every gentle repositioning of a shivering shoulder, became an unspoken lesson. Survival was not only in endurance, but in the quiet, patient cultivation of trust. The night stretched on interminably, a canvas painted with frost, whispered breaths, and the relentless heartbeat of humanity within a confined, rattling metal box. By 6 a.m., January 13th, 1944, the truck eased to a stop atop a frozen hill. Snow lay in soft mounds, glittering faintly under the first pale light of dawn, reflecting a grayish gold across the valley below. The air was sharp, carrying the tang of frost and distant smoke from a lone farmhouse. The prisoners, stiff and rigid from hours of confinement, felt the cold bite through even the layers of wool and tattered coats. Luigi stepped out first, pressing the blanket tightly around his shoulders, its frayed fibers clinging to his coat and hands. Warmth lingering stubbornly in patches against his chest and arms. His boots sank slightly in the snow, sending tiny clouds of powder curling upward. Franz remained at the truck's edge, silent, watching, but not intervening. The men slowly followed, their movements careful, each step cautious on the slick, frozen ground. Small acts of human care persisted. Luigi draped a corner of the blanket over Pietro's shoulders, adjusting it around his numb arms. Mario bent, scooping snow into a handkerchief to dampen the gusts striking a fellow's face. A minor shield against the wind. Every gesture, though slight, carried weight, protection, patience, the creation of shared endurance. The blanket was no longer just cloth, it had become a vessel for trust, a tactile link between bodies huddled in discomfort. Luigi's gaze swept across the valley, noticing how the snow muffled sound, how the wind sculpted drifts along tree branches and fence lines. His mind flickered homeward, recalling his mother's careful stitching, the scent of fabric softener she had used. The memory, tangible in the fabric he held, reminded him that survival was as much emotional as physical. Fear had not vanished, but it had been transformed into a quiet camaraderie, a collective patience that bound them against exposure and uncertainty. The men's breaths came in white clouds, coalescing briefly before fading into the morning air. Franz's restraint, his choice to stand aside, underscored a subtle lesson. Safety sometimes arrives through inaction as much as through command. Luigi, adjusting the blanket over a shivering companion's neck, felt a small, rising warmth, not from the cloth alone, but from shared understanding and quiet moral courage. Snow crunched under boots, wind hissed over slopes, and the men, bound by threadbare warmth and mutual care, faced the new day alive. A fragile but undeniable triumph. Weeks later, as January gave way to February, the POWs were moved to a larger camp near Rome. Roads were uneven, dust and frozen mud coating boots, but the frayed blanket remained in Luigi's possession, a tangible thread connecting past endurance to present trials. Its fibers bore the faint scent of home, the residual warmth of hands pressed against it during the long night, and each fold carried a whisper of shared survival. Every time it brushed against skin, Luigi felt the weight of quiet heroism and restraint replayed in memory. The real shock came later. Franz, the same guard who had earlier stepped aside, appeared again along the line of prisoners. He moved with unhurried steps, passing without scrutiny, without a single reprimand or harsh word. The prisoner's fear shifted, first to disbelief, then to subtle gratitude. The recognition that a human element persisted amidst the machinery of war was both unexpected and profound. The blanket, once a protective covering, now embodied the memory of this restraint, an anchor to humanity amidst chaos. Luigi folded it carefully, tracing frayed threads with fingers worn by frost and toil. Each thread carried traces of touch, breaths shared, whispered reassurances exchanged in the darkness, small acts, adjusting the blanket over a shivering comrade, leaning close to hear a faint grazie, created ripples of moral courage. Unnoticed by the broader world, yet monumental in their quiet significance. Survival was no longer a measure of distance traveled or battles endured. It was encoded in the subtle protection and care exchanged between ordinary men. As the men settled into their new routines, a short montage unfolded, ration lines forming and dispersing, small chores completed under watchful eyes, whispers of strategy and hope punctuating the monotony. Each day reinforced endurance, each night threaded with memories of a shared past. Luigi's blanket remained, worn but steadfast, a reminder that ordinary decency, quietly exercised, could carry meaning far beyond the immediate moment. It was a relic, a symbol, and a testament to the human capacity for restraint, care, and connection even when surrounded by the machinery of conflict. December 1994. Near Naples, Luigi, now 74, sat in a small community hall, the winter sun slanting through frosted windows and casting pale streaks across wooden floors. In his hands rested the same frayed blanket, edges worn thin, color faded to a muted gray that whispered of decades gone by. The fabric smelled faintly of mothballs and polished wood, the subtle scent pulling memories from across half a century. Across the room, Mario, 78, shuffled forward, his eyes lighting with recognition, lines of age and hardship etched into his face. Their hands met briefly over the blanket, a silent acknowledgement of shared history. No words were necessary. Time had condensed their collective experience into a single palpable moment. The men embraced quietly, the blanket between them, a bridge across decades of absence and change. Memory surfaced in fragments, the crunch of snow under boots, the hiss of wind across a frozen hilltop, whispered breaths inside a rattling truck, the tactile memory of the blanket, the rough texture beneath fingers, the lingering warmth of shared proximity, recalled nights of fear, endurance, and quiet acts of humanity. Franz, now in his 80s, had sent a brief note of acknowledgement months prior, a recognition of restraint and shared morality that had lingered unnoticed for decades. The men, sitting side by side, allowed the fabric to speak the language of survival, trust, and ordinary courage. Luigi draped the blanket over a chair, fingers tracing the worn threads, feeling the imprints of countless hands pressed against it. The weight of breaths and whispers folded into every fiber. The hall smelled faintly of wood polish, mingling with the mustiness of the blanket, forming a sensory portal to the past. Their reunion was contemplative, a testament to quiet heroism and human decency. Ordinary acts that once seemed small now carried monumental significance. Silence enveloped them, punctuated by distant traffic and muted murmurs from the hall, a gentle backdrop to the emotional resonance of their shared history. As Luigi looked at the blanket, he whispered a line that would echo through generations. Sometimes survival is just the kindness we let pass quietly between us. It was a truth measured not in distance traveled or battles survived, but in the subtle, patient cultivation of trust and care. For viewers and listeners, this story serves as a reminder. Ordinary courage exists in small gestures, in restraint, in the quiet protection of one another. Even decades later, The ripple of a single act of decency can stretch across lifetimes. A fragile yet enduring thread binding humanity through time.